So Steve, we met for a while back. So Steve and I met a while back. Very like-minded guys. When it comes to property management, here's the thing. When it comes to owning rentals, who here owns rentals currently? Right? So a good bit of the room. Who here is looking to start buying rentals? Is that? Yeah. So well, I'm always looking to buy. So here's one of those things, guys. When it comes to being an active investor, a huge part of that, guys, is a very big skill set is management. Have any of you guys ever bought properties from a distressed owner before? Yeah, right? One of the biggest things is a lack of management. Maybe it's they're not managing their financials, or they're not managing the tenant in place, or they're not managing the property. Here's the thing is, one of the biggest questions I want you to ask yourself is, what is the difference between you and them? Because they own the property. You've heard me say this before, owning real estate is not enough. You have to be able to manage it right for you to not be in their same shoes. Okay? So a huge part is, if you're wanting to be a buy and hold investor, I highly recommend that you constantly be improving your management skills. Whether that is you doing 100% self-managing or you hiring a third party. So he's with Pelican Realty. They manage, and I'll have you share about that here in a second. They manage for other people. That doesn't mean you're 100% hands off. That means you need to make sure that you have a good relationship. Now, I'm not saying go burden them and be in their office every day. I mean, why hire them at that point, right? But at the same time, you want to make sure that you are playing your role in that relationship as well. So with that being said, so Steve, talk to me real quick. Introduce yourself with Pelican. And tell us how many properties you guys manage. How long have you been doing it for?
Okay, so Steve Leonard of Pelican Realty. I've been doing real estate since '96 under a license with the Real Estate Commission. Prior to '96, I managed family properties that my father owned himself, and then slowly got into my own properties. And it was eventually a real estate agent that I used who said, "Hey, you should go get your license. You would be great at this." Okay, so get my license, and here we are today. So what do we manage? We're probably right at about 250 doors now total.
Is it all single family? You guys manage?
No, so it's scattered sites, not all in one location like an apartment complex, and it's also from single family up to a 16-plex, and then some small commercial as well. So we've got office building, and then some small industrial as well. So from a commercial standpoint, but mostly it's a mix again of singles, doubles, 4-plex, all the way up to 16 units. So we've got, as far as our large properties, it's 16, 12, 10, 7. And then a 6-plex.
So he's looking here. This is his son, Nick Leonard, right here, who's his right-hand man in the company. Okay, so you're managing 250, but how many of them are your own?
Of my own, I'm just under 100.
Okay, so he's got 100 rentals. Now you've been doing this for a good while. Your portfolio has, at one point you owned the 50 unit, 150, and then so you've had some adjustments over the year. We've talked a lot, so I want to let you get going and sharing what you want to share today within the next hour on, hey, what do you think is necessary if someone's looking to either improve their management or get started managing rentals? What is that 101 basis that you think they need to have, to start from?
Okay, so to me, the Landlording 101, the way I want to start that would be, hire Pelican Realty, and I appreciate y'all coming. From a landlording standpoint, as Courtney said, the biggest problem why you pick up or you can pick up distressed properties is the current landlord didn't do a good job. They don't have the time. Their job gets in their way, their life gets in their way, whatever it may be. And a lot of what we pick up from a management standpoint ends up being self-managed properties that the people say, I just can't handle it anymore. I don't want to deal with it anymore. And once we get involved, they kind of sit back and go, wow, this is so much easier. And then they actually can start to see, not always, but in a lot of cases, people can then start to see that, hey, I can actually scale up a little bit. meaning they can then go and start shopping for more property, which we are full service, but we specialize in property management or asset management. And so at the end of the day, it gives people an opportunity to go look for the next deal, find the next property, scale up. Or do you want to just own one property? Some people are happy owning 1, 2, 3 properties, and they say, I'm going to self-manage it because it's a A-grade property. It's going to have, higher rents. I won't have to worry about things. So it depends on what market you're looking for and determine, how you might want to manage and how you will end up dealing with that. Some single-family owners that do their own management have their own little spreadsheet. They go to either Google Sheets or Excel. They keep track of everything that way. We use a software. It tracks our rents, it tracks communications. If you're in our system, whether it be a resident, an owner, a vendor, an owner prospect, which is future owners that we're going to hopefully manage for, it will track all their incoming calls, it will track their texts that we send in and out. Soon, hopefully before the end of the year, we'll be able to track emails in and out rather than having to cut and paste.
Why is that so important?
Tracking any communication is good. I mean, if he gets sick and he's out, meaning Nick, then the rest of the office is able to see what's been going on. If somebody, who does the day-to-day phone calls, if he's taking notes every call that comes in, when the next person calls in, if they're not the ones who receive the call, somebody else picks up the line, it pops up on the computer that, well, they know what they're calling about. They called in this morning, they're calling back about what happened. So the communication and it also tracks their work orders or maintenance requests. So somebody calls in and says, hey, my AC's not cooling. Okay, we turn around and maintenance will send out a work order to the vendor. The vendor then calls the tenant, gives a time, they schedule, the vendor goes and looks at it, or they can't get a hold of the tenant. And at some point, the vendor will call us back and report to us as a maintenance department that, hey, I've tried for the last 4 hours, I can't get a hold of your tenant, you need to get in touch with them. If they've got a problem, I can't get there to fix it without communication. That lets us know, and again, from trackability, we know who the vendor is, we know what tenant we got to call. We call them back and say, hey, our vendor's trying to get in touch with you. You're not going to get your air conditioner fixed without answering this call. We then make sure that they make the contact where we help them facilitate the appointment time. So again, trackability is important so that you can stay on top of it, and we can also report to owners as needed. Maintenance is being done. It's going to be in their billing, but they also might want to just know what was the maintenance for. Or we tell owners, or we'll advise owners, on a drive-by inspection, exterior. Hey, it looks like you're getting some wood rot. It's mainly water. It's not termites or whatever. We recommend let's do this, whatever it may be, to repair it. So we're giving you recommendations as a management company to protect your asset, and that's something that landlords don't always do. They let that deferred maintenance. They figure, if it's rented, everything's good. I'm sitting back, and that's how maintenance becomes an issue. That's why they become distressed. That's why they get headaches. And that's why an owner eventually says, I'm done with this.
And then they sell it as a discount to someone like us in this room, right? But it boils down to is, and I've said this before, there's 2 ways to build wealth: owning businesses and owning real estate. Well, how does your children's children know your name? It's when you treat the business that you own, the real estate you own, as a business, right? And again, owning it is not enough, right? Just because you're like, oh great, I have rentals now, and so that's why getting the management part is critical. And so he's in the business of managing real estate, right? So one question you should ask yourself is am I treating my real estate like a business? Right? Look at that. Has anyone, especially if you self-manage, are you tracking your communication with your tenants, right? Like, are you keeping a line? Because, for example, what about when you go to eviction court?
Eviction court, judges want to see, what do they owe, or what are you putting them out for? What is the eviction for? And when we walk into court, typically, and my manager does, she's bringing in a unpaid transactional document that basically spells out from day 1 to the day of and shows all the charges and the unpaid balances. We bring in our history notes, which shows all the calls. And a lot of times it's our calls to them, meaning the tenants, that we either are telling them to take a pool down or pay your rent. We have text that go out automatically with the software as a reminder, hey, your rent's coming due on the 1st. Hey, your rent's past due. It's, here's your late fee. Make sure you get it paid. If you don't pay, we're going to be putting a notice on your door. Or we've got waiver of notice in the lease, and we turn around and go straight to court and file the eviction. Waiver of notice is simply in the document that state statute says they've signed the document, they can waive their notice fee or notice allowance, which is typically 5 days or 10 days, depending on the situation. A lot of programs you have to, if you're doing, housing programs or any other federally funded programs, you have to give notice regardless of whether there's waiver in the lease. So,
Right.
Those are things, again, that in our system we will track from a lease standpoint of, do we have to give notice, do we not have to give notice? If we don't, we go straight to the courthouse and we'll file. We do work with all of our tenants to give us an opportunity or give them an opportunity to make their payment. Sometimes we'll stretch it a little bit more, we'll get them to make another promise to pay, which is essentially recommitting that I'm gonna make this payment, I lost my job, or, I got injured, or I was sick for a week, and, they're punching a clock. And so we're not heartless as a management company, nor should an owner be, but the goal being tracking all of that. If they make a promise to pay, we put it on, we've got an alert that pops up on the system that says, hey, don't forget to ask Bob about, his rent, or Sally about the rent, if we didn't have all of that with 250 plus doors, there's just no way. Then it's just a hodgepodge of a mess, and 2 months later you're sitting there going, why didn't Tony make his rent payment? Because we don't know. So when you go to court, we're bringing our lease, we're bringing our history notes, and we're bringing our receivables that they haven't paid, and basically saying, here's everything we have, Your Honor. What do they have to say? Well, that's when this is wrong, or I had this happen, and this is why, and, at the end of the day, make your payment. If you make your payment or you communicate with us as a management company, we're usually very understanding, as long as it's not repetitive, meaning every single month.
Something that's really important. How many of you guys, has anyone here ever attended eviction court before? So I brought Cole with me one time because I was like, hey, I want you to watch this. When you go, you can see very easily who is professional managing, like a professional manager. Whether their name is property manager or not is not elusive of that concept, right?
Right.
I've seen some property managers be the furthest thing from professional, right? They show up with no documentation, or they're very emotionally, leading their case versus factually. And so sometimes, man, I say, hey, if you ever want to get a good dose, go sit down and watch what good management looks like, because you can tell it a mile away in eviction court, because it's you have good documentation, right? Bad managers often fail to keep good records, right? The second thing is you know how to basically just provide the facts.
Correct.
and stick on the facts and not being emotional. Some landlords really struggle with management because they only lead with the emotional.
Right. I mean, a lot of times people want to go into court and eviction court and tell their story. And, for me as a management company and from a manager who does a lot of the evictions, the facts is what we're here to tell. We're not here to talk about anything other than we're sorry they haven't paid. We gave them an opportunity. We have to give time through the court system. We did our paperwork, and we're here because either me or the owners want their money. Just because you hear landlord, it seems like a lot of people believe as a landlord you must be independently wealthy. You must not have any expenses, and you're just raking in the debt. And that's the furthest from the truth, because most landlords do have a mortgage. They didn't hit the Powerball, so they didn't buy it in cash. And so you're sitting there trying to make your note and pay your taxes, pay your insurance, whatever it may be, and maybe make a few dollars. And so, COVID was a big awakening for the landlords who have 1 and 2 and 3 doors.
Yep.
And if they didn't work with their tenants, or if they work with their tenants in a strong way. I mean, at the time when COVID first started, I think we were somewhere around maybe 200 doors, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but we communicate with everybody. We communicate with the owners first to say, hey, this looks like it's going to be an issue. We're not sure how long it's going to last. I don't think anybody knew at the beginning. But when the eviction moratorium kicked in, that was a rude awakening for us as a management company that, hey, what are we supposed to do? our decision as a management company was to talk to the owners and say, either let us deal with it the way we feel fit, that will benefit you, because it's gonna be the way we handle my properties as well, or you give me instructions and that's all we're gonna adhere to. There's not gonna be a back and forth going back and forth. And every owner that we talked to and got emails from or calls from, all said, do what you think is right. We even had a couple of owners who said, I understand your job is to collect the rent, but hey, if you wanna give them a couple months off, by all means. Let's not stretch it too far, but let us do our job, is what it boiled down to. I think we had, out of 200 plus doors, 3 people essentially who said, I'm not paying, you can't force me out, and I'm not going to pay. I mean, everybody.
That's such a low percentage though.
It is. I mean, everybody either continued paying because they were the lucky ones that continue having a job, or they were getting some sort of subsidy, or they already had a savings, which is great, and then they were able to make even partial payments. Hey, I'm going to pay you a little bit this week, and I'll pay you a little bit in 2 weeks, whatever it may be. And that was sufficient for us to notify our owners that, hey, we've got a payment plan, this is what each of your other tenants are doing. And so we were lucky to some where we didn't have to worry about it. The few who chose not to pay and just flat out said, I'm not paying, there's nothing you can do, the day we were able to give notice, boom, go give notice, get them in the court. There was a, I think, 2-month window where, you know, when COVID supposedly was going to stop or the moratorium stopped before they put it back in place, there was like a 2-month window. Courts were jam-packed. We had already filed, we had already put them in place, and we were able to get a couple of these people out, where the other one, or 2, whatever it ended up being, ended up, you know, going through the federal program where not only did they give us the back rent, but they also gave 3 months in advance. It's kind of like, okay, Mr. Owner, so we couldn't do anything. Yes, they were the problem. Let it be known that when the 45 days is up after the last payment, they're getting notice to non-renew. And that's, you know, all we can do to control it.
But you still made a whole financially. Well, during COVID, I got so many calls between the radio show and the REIA of people who just, they didn't have the reserves to handle and weather COVID. But they also were not plugged in to where they could learn about the different government systems. Look, during COVID, if you did not collect rent, it's not the tenant's fault.
Right.
I mean, in some cases, yes.
It is.
But it was the owner, it was, because there were so many programs out there making everyone whole.
Right.
But here's the thing is, so many times people are like, look, I can't afford these mortgages, right? I don't have the reserves. But it was, hey, go look up. Look, there was, I mean, easily, I think every state had one. But there was also other things outside the state's unit. So there were so many opportunities. And so a huge part to that, one of the biggest things here is, so I call those mom and pop landlords, people who don't treat their rentals as a business, right? So not professional landlords, but mom and pop. I literally, and we'll, do you mind if I ask a question? Point to you. Okay, so just recently, there was didn't you guys see the article with NOLA.com about the rising rents? Rents are rising like crazy. So there's a group, should I name it? I was like, wait, we're recording. There is a group on Facebook, I'll say it, Bad Landlords of NOLA. I don't know, 20,000+ people in it? I want to be like, stop. So I'm in there. Look, my loved ones are renting. In New Orleans, so I want to know, right? Like if there's people who are like legitimately not good, right? But at the same time, being in that group has really opened my eyes to a prevailing mindset of how people perceive landlords or, you know, different things. But long story short, I got to meet the guy writing the article through there, and we got talking, and but they were doing an article on the rising rents. A huge part to that, but a big part of my conversation was with him that mom and pop landlords, they cannot survive in today's era because of the rise on rents. Like if you don't raise your rents to reflect the rise on taxes and insurance, like that's been crazy, the cost to do repairs, all these things. If you do not raise your rent to reflect those things, the day when you can have, your rent's not raised for 20 years is over. right?
It is, but I will interject on that and say.
So tell me what your thoughts, first of all, what are your thoughts on the rising rents? Obviously, we've been seeing that. And then how do you go about raising rents, and what's your methodology and ideology with
So I
that?
was gonna say, my idea on raising rents is more old school. Like today, you can, if it's a vacant property and you're gonna put it on the market, yeah, fair market rent. If you had a rental from 2 years ago, traditionally you'll see rents raised, at least in my eyes, it's always been that $25, $35, is what is customary. You won't see tenants wanna leave because you're raising rents, but now if you've got a bill that's gonna hit your market and it's gonna be another $1,200 a year, yes, you might have to do a bigger increase just to help offset. But I am not a management company that believes in these $200 and $300 rental rate increases just because, well, that's what the market's gonna bear. Because at some point, that rental rate will come down. That's my opinion. And most of my owners will agree with that. That it's better to have an occupant that's already been there. I'm sorry?
Retention.
Exactly.
Especially if you
It's
have
better to
a-
have somebody there who's been there maybe a year or two already to get a minimal increase, unless you need to go higher, which we understand, but if you don't need to, do the minimal increase like you should or would,
How often?
once a year.
Okay.
Once a year. I mean, I've known some management companies that will do rental increases 2 and 3 times a year, meaning they won't give them a 1-year lease. They'll
So
give
that
them a
they-
3-month lease.
Because if they have a
months,
1-year lease, they're locked in at that price. So
Correct.
keep that in mind
Correct. And
with that.
so, I'm not, again, it's for me, if I were to raise some of my rents $200 and $300 in a short period of time, yes, I can probably get it, and some of them will stay, some will leave, because, well, look at what they're up against. I mean, the rents are very high.
Right.
But when the market starts to take a dive, what's gonna happen to your rental? You're gonna have another vacancy. Now you're used to this, and now you've gotta come back down. To me, I've always believed in if you're making money, let's say $1,000 a month rent, and you can go up that $25 to $1,025, and you're still making money, even though you might need to get $1,100, is it worth that extra $75 to potentially be empty? Because now that the tenant moves out, you've got to turn a unit, let's just say that's $1,500, $2,000 or more, and then you've got to put it back on the market. You're going to pay a commission or a lease fee, whether we're doing it or somebody else. You as the owner might be doing it, but let's just say you've got a vacancy for a month or two, then you've got to re-rent it, maybe pay somebody a commission or a lease fee, and then kind of get it back into the swing. The 2 months that you just lost is likely more than what you would have gained had you just left them in the unit for the next year and a half or 2 years that they stay.
And that's an excellent point. One thing you want to be very careful. Everyone's raising their rents like crazy right now, right? Look, and obviously when it's vacant, it's a different story because I have some that have gone $300 to $500 like more than what I had them rented at previously. In the sense of we had one in Hammond, went from $1,300 to $1,800 is what we're collecting now on it, and it's just so those things are crazy. But here's the thing: is if you have a tenant in place and you go to do it, most people are not checking their income based on those rent increases, right? And what's been happening to people's incomes, right? First of all, you've been having some job changes, right? The other thing is what's happened to all their other life expenses. Right. Can they still afford this? And so one of the things that I'm very concerned with is, like with a greedy landlord, there's a difference between being the pig and the hog, right? One gets fed, one gets slaughtered, right? The idea is you want to balance it out. You don't want to be the guy who doesn't raise rent for 20 years.
Right, absolutely.
But you don't want to go and do a 20-year worth of increase in 1 year. So It's one of those things you want to do, because here's the other thing is if you're getting you're milking your tenant dry of every little bit of the market rent, who's been in there with you for a while, they may have to go look somewhere else, because when they look at all their other expenses, and y'all turnovers, it's not affordable, and turnover is expensive.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, and those are the things that we're looking at and keeping into our evaluation when we're talking to an owner. That we might be able to get an extra $200, but if we do that increase and that tenant opts to leave, they're now on the driver's seat. They give us their 30 or 60-day notice. They're gone. When they're gone, labor costs to paint the unit and turn it around is higher. Materials, if there's anything broken, higher. getting it back on the market. Again, let's figure 1 or 2 months. That 1 or 2 months, you know, you basically lost a $25 increase because you went for 200 or more. And again, it's not to say that there are properties out there that don't require that, because if an owner acquires a new property today and it's been on the same rental rate for the last 7 or 10 years, yeah, that's a different story. I'm talking about something that, you know, just leased maybe a couple of years ago or less. And yeah, you might even get $200 more, but if you're making money and everything is good as a landlord, my opinion, not every landlord's gonna be that way, not every management company's gonna be that way. I will do my traditional increase. Sometimes it might, instead of being, you know, the 25 or 30, it might be 45 or 50, but it's going to be a reasonable increase. And it's also going to try to take into consideration if people are telling us what their taxes have gone up to, what their insurance is going up to. And sometimes, you know, you can't compensate enough of an increase for what happens with taxes and insurance. Mm-hmm. You know, if they add more millages, flood insurance is a huge change going on.
It's causing people to get out of the business.
It absolutely is.
So not only have I have bought not only a lot from individual landlords, but I have bought packages from landlords, right, because they're just getting out of the business. 1, because of COVID. 2, because of the mindset, the cultural, social mindset about landlords these days. They're worried about geopolitical interference. But the other one is just all the crazy expenses of things they can't control. And a lot of us as investors, we have control problems, so we don't like that, right? So, I mean, with that being said, talk to us about how, you know, talk to us about do you mind talking about screening tenants?
Absolutely.
Like when so you have a vacant unit, you know, today's day, you are getting slammed with rental applications the minute something becomes available. How do you find the right fit, the right person?
So our company, we look at job history, rental history, credit history. You know, we again, being one of those management companies that works with tenants, some landlords, some tenants will say, hey, they've got to have a 650 credit score or a 620 credit score or higher. You know, I've learned over the years that in our metro area, there's a lot of people who have a lot lower credit score because of whatever happens. School debt, medical bills, you know, divorce. You know, one spouse ran the credit cards up, but y'all were married, so it hit both of you. Now, your credit's bad, their credit's bad. You don't worry about the one who's not in front of you. You worry about the one in front of you. So years ago, we started where, you know, a basic criteria for the credit score is that we'll ask for either a deposit and a half or a double deposit. That's our way of saying yes instead of no, which is what a lot of other companies will do. It's on our application, it's in our paperwork. Tenants know it when they sign the paperwork and start their application. They know what's required, they know what their deposits are going to be, what fees will be incurred. And so we're looking at those items. So first thing, a lot of people look at credit score. We then call their job. You know, jobs today, they don't tell you a whole lot other than yes, they're employed and this is what they make. You're validating, simply put.
How do you confirm, first of all, how do you do these things? How do you get someone's credit score? Like, do you send them to a website? Is there an application fee?
So,
you know,
so our company, we work with a company, Ameren. It's all integrated within our website and in our software that we use for managing everything. There are different companies out there like Equifax. I mean, there's 3 main companies, but I mean, there are smaller independent companies that individual landlords will use and can use to run that credit bureau, the credit report. Some credit reports will pick up if there's an eviction, some will not. A lot of that has to do with if it's recorded against one of the individuals, if it's actually filed in a court where it's not on pen and paper, which a couple of my districts in Jefferson Parish are that way. But if they actually enter it into a database like any clerk of court does, then that'll typically pick up automatically.
What
so
about
there are companies out there? Some
Okay.
some will promote themselves as free for the landlord, meaning they're just basically going to charge the tenant. But then they're only going to give you a limited information. And then there's some where the landlord will actually set up the account. People will apply under their account. They do pay the landlord, and then the landlord gets the report.
So one of those things is so that's credit wise. There are various sites you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about vetting like their job. I know I've had in my past job at property management, and even now, I have people put their friend's number down. They put their job and maybe a boss or a fake boss, but they put their friend's number down. Like, obviously you're gonna have those situations. So what is is there anything that you guys do other than just call what's on the application? Do y'all do anything else special?
Yeah, so I mean, in the application again, so credit history, pretty hard to manipulate. It's a credit bureau, they run it off your name, your social, things like that. Job history, yes, they will put, the friend's name. A lot of times it's their cell phone number. We will actually call the actual employment office or the company that they're working for. Hey, I'm looking for Jane Doe.
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, we don't have a Jane that works here. Oh, really? I understand this is so-and-so supervisor. No, the supervisor for her or him is Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And,
so that's a really good tip.
You're kind of catching it. I mean, we don't see it in employment as much as my landlord.
Yes.
Landlords, they'll, and I can tell you one of the cases we had, people applied, they had given us a name of their landlord. We called the landlord. They didn't have any clue what we were calling about it initially. After a minute of conversation, they're like, oh yeah, that's right, they live in my property at 123 Happy Street. Oh, how long have you owned the property? Oh, I've been having it for like 10 years. While I'm sitting online looking up JP assessors because we're in Jefferson Parish going, well, when did you buy it from Jack? Who's Jack? He's the registered owner of the property. Wow. Funny enough that I said it in front of a manager. The manager said, hey, I actually know Jack. Let me call him. Calls Jack, hey, do you have this person living in your property? Yes. Who's so-and-so? That's the roommate. Oh, okay. It ended up being he was a Section 8 housing candidate. The person that was living in the property was a Section 8 housing candidate. So of course, being a good management company, we turned it around and reported it because they were committing fraud essentially. And from what we understood, and we were not at the end of it, but from what we were told by Jack, they both got booted out. They didn't get a voucher any further. And basically they lost their house. I mean,
but so vetting is critical because like one of the golden rules of real estate is trust but verify.
Right.
And that trust is a loose term. Correct.
So, I mean, the thing that we don't get into a lot, and I'll just throw that out as from Section 8, when they say voucher, their voucher is, let's say, $1,200. A lot of times we'll get calls from potential prospects, potential applicants who say, well, I'll pay the extra $300. But we don't do that. I know there are landlords who do, but we are not one of those landlords. We are not one of those management companies because that's called fraud, and we don't commit fraud. But it's crazy. In a month, you might have 3 to 5 people ask that same question.
Yeah. So one of the things here is, so obviously we all call real estate assets, right? Mm-hmm. And that it very much can be, but a piece of property can be a liability too. So what makes something a liability is a bad tenant. And that's why screening is so critical, because you're doing the work up front to do your best to sniff out a bad tenant, because having a bad tenant is what turns that property into a liability. Predominantly the liability, right? So a huge part of that is you want to pick a tenant that's an asset. For you, what are you looking for a tenant that is an asset? So we talked about credit score. You said, if they have a blemished or a bruised credit score, you might ask for 1.5 or 2 times deposit. Right. A little bit more skin in the game. Because look, things happen. You have good people.
Well, ultimately, the thing about asking for the extra deposit or double deposit is, at the end of the day, our only real protection for a landlord that we're managing for is making sure the rents get collected and the house isn't abused. Mm-hmm. House being abused, we do the inspections. That's pretty simple. Making sure that tenants pay, not as simple, but our guarantee is not letting them take a month to get their payment to us. At the point that they don't pay and we don't have communication, like when I was doing the leases, which I don't do a whole lot of today, my manager does, but when I was doing it, at the face-to-face turning the key over to a tenant, I'd always say, if I have to call you for the rent, trust me, there's going to be no consideration or cooperation from my end, it's gonna be pay the late fees and everything that's due, period. But if you call me and say, hey, this is what's going on, I won't have it on the 5th, but I'll have it by the 8th or 9th or 10th, I'll take that in consideration, and if I can waive some late fees, I will. Never seems to fail, people will not call, and we're calling them late on the 5th or first thing on the 6th, saying, hey, well, you know, this happened and that happened, and, well, there's no consideration for you, because now we're tracking you down because you didn't pay. But we do have tenants who make that consideration and they'll call, and so for us, we're looking for people that are what we believe to be trustworthy. We're looking for that job history where, you know, they're in a position that they haven't been there just 2 weeks. We do look at, you know, 2.5 times their income for a rental.
So 2.5, not 3.
I mean, a lot of people have pushed it to 3. Things are expensive now. The incomes are not what they can be, should be, maybe need to be. So we've kind of ratcheted back down to 2.5. I mean, 2.5, but it's up to the tenant to be mindful of their own expenses. Like, we're looking at things, we're looking at their credit, we're looking at their job, we're looking at their rental history, and at the end of the day, I mean, they've got to make the ultimate decision. Yes, I can afford this, or no, because I'm lying about all my income, which brings me to the point is that there's new things on the market for verifying information from a tenant that we have not implemented yet only because my third-party processor hasn't done it. It's a secondary possibility that it'll be there. We're hoping by third quarter that it'll be automatically implemented and in our software, where they basically go into your bank account as a tenant and verify. You say you're getting paid $1,600 so every 2 weeks. They're looking for a $1,600 or whatever deposit every 2 weeks. If it ain't there, they're trying to validate, well, where's your money go? How did you get paid?
Right.
You know, you say you only spend $500 a month in expenses. They're going in saying, well, no, you actually spend $2,000, but you only get $1,600 in income. You're upside down every single month. So that is starting to happen. There are some companies offering it today. They're not integrated with the software, so we're not implementing them personally yet, but we're hoping again third quarter. You had a question?
Yeah, I've seen some applications asking for what type of vehicle the tenants are driving. So my question, how often do you go to the property and check if there's like new faces and there are new vehicles and stuff like that? How you can prove that there's nobody else living in that property but the tenant? Because this is another risk.
Right, that's one of the hard ones to prove. Like we've had situations where we have filed for possession because there's multiple people living there. Ultimately, you're looking for, you know, what kind of situation is making it look like there's multiple people living there, multiple vehicles. You go into a spot inspection and, you know, it's a 3-bed house and each bedroom has 2 sets of bunk beds. So, you know, you're potentially housing 12 people and you've got 8 cars out.
And there's no kids in the house. So real quick, what is a spot inspection? You just mentioned that, a spot inspection. Talking about these risks, other people living in the properties or the absolute deterioration, right? Like we've all seen those worst case scenarios where a tenant like might really beat up a house. That doesn't happen generally overnight. It's very rarely is it an overnight. So you mentioned, oh yeah, for sure, it happens overnight. You know, one party going really bad, but no. What do you do? Do you and talk about, is it built, how do you build it into the lease to document that it's going to happen, or do you, and then what do you do to basically do those check-ins?
So spot inspection, you know, we'll give a little bit of notice, we'll basically pop up, we're in the neighborhood, we'll try to hit multiple doors rather than just one, where we want to get inside, you know, and in those inspections, we might be looking at AC filters if it's tenant's responsibility. Some are owner's responsibility depending on location of the AC filter. Meaning, you know, if a filter's on the ceiling, we don't want tenants climbing ladders. So we've been talking with owners recently where we're now offering that as a service to come out and change those filters. If it's on the ground, that's pretty easy. You know, but those are things that we're looking at when we go through. We're looking for, you know, are they smoking in the unit because all of our units are non-smoking? Do they have pets in the unit unless they're a pet property? Do they have multiple people living in the property, meaning how many beds do they have? Those are things in an inspection that we're looking for. Wear and tear on the doors and walls.
Smoking, those are
Holes,
pet things, like, and then,
those
yeah.
are things that, after we do an inspection, if there's a problem or we feel there's a problem, we might do a follow-up, maybe a week or two later. Because, when people know you're coming, they'll try to clean up a little bit. But if you're gonna be coming again because you have some concerns and you're letting them know that, hey, this needs to be taken care of, we'll be back in 7 days, and then you're showing up again, they've got to clean it all back up. But we try to give quiet enjoyment, that's part of their lease. Meaning we're not going in every month, we're not knocking on the door, we're not just showing up out of the blue. We might, if we're in the neighborhood and we see that people are home, we might knock on the door and say, hey, we were in the neighborhood talking to neighbors 3 doors down, and hey, we just wanted to kind of come see everything's all right. That, and some of that will be done early in the lease. Make sure they got settled in. Do you have any problems, concerns? Is there anything I can do while I'm here as a manager? If not, if you got a work order, just put it in through the portal. So that's where a spot inspection comes. Lease renewals will typically, we get alerted, I think it's 85 days out. Our lease calls for a 60-day renewal notice or a 60-day vacate. So 85, we're getting notification that the lease is coming due. We're using a new company called Z Inspector, which does electronic inspections that the tenants can do. Once that will come back to us, then we'll do a
So they
physical walkthrough.
take pictures, like it sends them something and it says, hey, take a picture of the living room
It sends them
or
a
whatever.
link.
Okay.
It gives them basic instructions. It's what we use for our move-in. We've been using it for a while for move-in. We haven't had the move-outs yet.
That's cool.
But the move-outs will be, essentially 75, 80 days out. They'll get notice that they have to go through and take certain pictures in certain rooms and, appliances to make sure they're cleaning and things like that. And then if they're renewing, then we will come and do a walkthrough because you can't smell through a video inspection or a snapshot inspection. So we're walking through to make sure smoke and dogs, other issues that didn't show up in the photography.
Sure.
And then we'll publish their renewal lease. And we'll do another year.
Let's talk about, go ahead.
How do you navigate fair housing, and is there any differences between a single family home and a large multifamily in fair housing?
Fair housing is, there are certain things that you can and can't do, and in way between single and multi, I'm not following the question.
It's
other
federally
than-
mandated, so it's the same for 100%.
housing, how many people can live in it or something?
I don't know. I thought I saw somewhere that there was under 4 units. There was a difference in fair housing compared to a commercial property. Maybe not.
I don't.
We, as a licensed agent, we follow fair housing, whether it's a 1 unit or a 500 unit. It doesn't make no difference for us.
Can you explain what fair housing is and the role that it should play in a landlord's life?
Everybody should follow fair housing. There are certain rules, and because we're a company, I follow our rules, which is everybody's protected under the fair housing, in my eyes. Certain landlords, if you live on the property, and I don't know all the rules of that because it's not for me. If you live on the property or you're a single rental landlord, there are certain things that you don't have to follow. But again, if you want to avoid trouble, follow fair housing, which is not violating somebody else's rights.
Yeah.
Good.
Are y'all finding a lot of people have what do they call the pets that
Support animals.
support? Everybody emotional
support.
Yeah, they could have everybody.
There's a lot of legislation right now for.
Used to get around. I'm sorry, used to get around the no pet policy or something.
Right.
Yeah.
There are people. We use a company called PetScreening.com in part of our application. And if you have an animal, not a pet, but you have an animal or a pet, you have to apply. If you have a support animal or a ESA, there's no charge for that after they validate your information. And they will tell us 1 through 5 essentially, 1 being the worst, I think, 5 being the best.
What do you mean, like the worst? Like it's this is not a very
Can't validate.
okay.
If they're saying it's a support animal or it's a trained animal that's here for a specific medical need, and PetScreening.com can't validate it, they're probably going to be a 1 or a 2 at best. Versus everything's been validated, here you go. That's what we're looking for on animals. And for us, most of our owners currently are no pet policies. We're trying to curb that mindset of start accepting pets because pet owners tend to stay longer.
Yep.
Statistics show, not mine, but pet streams. And also,
How many people have pet? Like, it's a very high percentage.
There's a lot of people that have pets.
I mean, within this room, how many? I mean, I know we're not necessarily renters, but how many of us have pets, right? It's a large percentage of the room.
My wife has 4 dogs. is what I
So
do.
you don't? I was gonna say
I
you
have no
don't.
pets. She's got 4. She hates that, they mostly listen to me. But it's,
Well,
what it is.
so this is important because number one, that can absolutely be abused. The whole emotional support. Number one, so petscreen.com is a great tip. How about this? When people are coming through your application process, do you have a process of how you reject an applicant?
Have to.
Because have to, like everyone needs to, or you. And
Again,
then with fair housing on the fair, and this is where I wanted to point to on a fair housing side. Let me just say this, you guys, fair housing. If any of you guys are in our Facebook group, Southeast Louisiana Real Estate Investors Group, I posted in there, and I might have done it on the business page too, that they just recently had that fair housing virtual training that was free to attend. If you do self-management or have any involvement with your tenants, you need to get fair housing training. And you can often get it for free. But I know when I was working in property management, it was a huge part. We went through it. The company I worked for was under a dissent decree. They had violated the fair housing, and it was a major situation where they basically, not only did they have some massive fines, but they had all these stipulations of things they had to adhere to federally because they did that. So, and it was literally something where they had someone, if I recall the details right, it was an apartment complex, so the multifamily can be a part to this, but they had someone who was disabled, who they didn't have any units available, and basically they did not give them first right to it whenever one came available, and that person had been constantly asking for a lower level unit or something along those lines, and because they didn't go to them up front, it was one of those things where it's not very malicious, right? But they were found. It was a situation where it was big. So fair housing is critical if you have any involvement with tenants.
I was going to say, back to support animals and all that, kind of like Airbnbs, there's a lot more legislation coming around. Wholesaling, there's a lot more legislation coming around, or at least discussions of it. Same thing on support animals and stuff that, in some states, they've made it, I don't think it's a felony yet to lie about a support animal or a ESA.
Because I know the airplanes,
yes.
so the air,
Completely different.
well, but I know that they're pushing
Yes.
it a lot because it's being abused on like aircrafts, right?
Right.
When if you guys see someone flying with a damn peacock,
Right.
literally, but it's one of those things. So talk about how do you reject? So you have applicants. We talking about what you're looking for, and then how do you reject those who, for example, may be coming in? You're like, hey, this person is, that is the most non-trained dog in the world, right? That they're coming in saying this or whatever it may be. For whatever reason, how do you go about rejecting someone? You said you have to, so.
From a credit bureau standpoint, if you're rejecting somebody based on what's inside the credit bureau, you must send them an adverse letter, which is basically a rejection. It gives that prospect, applicant, the ability to go to whoever ran the credit or supplied the report to us. So it's a generic letter that we then check off. We reject it based on X. And it will say in the bottom, this report was generated and created by TransUnion, one of the top 3 or 4. I think there's 4 now. But that way, when we mail them that letter, if they have a question, it's not us. We went based on what was supplied to us. And that was supplied by TransUnion through a third party who compiled it for us. And so at the end of the day, they would then call TransUnion and say, hey, you got a lot of erroneous stuff here. You need to fix it. That's not in our wheelhouse. But again, I won't say it's impossible to get rejected by us, but we're pretty lax in the way of looking at the 3 criteria that we look at, which again is job, rental, and credit. You know, if you lie to us, that's pretty much an automatic dismissal. You know, no, I don't have any evictions, and then you're one of the lucky ones where it shows up on a report. Right here, eviction, we got it. Oh, well, you know, they filed, I didn't realize they actually did it.
So you can lie about it.
Right. Well, and a big part with fair housing is it's discrimination for things like familiar status, right? So you don't want to say things like in your advertising, no kids, right?
There are certain things, like Florida's very big about
Yes.
55 plus.
Yes.
And that isn't my wheelhouse either, but you know, there are certain criteria that
Where it does
you to
allow.
do certain things.
But for example, like race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, different things. So for example, if someone comes in, this is very real, wearing a hijabi, you can't just say, I don't rent to, in whatever slur you're going to say. Okay, so again, going back to that Facebook group, you literally are, someone just posted a situation where this person said that, you know, they were 5 years seizure free or something like that, and they just recently had 2 seizures that were like right out front of the thing, and the landlord heard about it and gave them, they were up to date paying, they gave them basically like a notice to leave. And the person says, I think that the landlord is evicting me because they're afraid that I'm a liability, right, with my seizures. And literally every comment was sue them, sue them, sue them. They can't do that. So, okay, so we live in a state where what is up and down the interstate? All the attorneys. Yes. So here's one of those things. So let me say 2 things. Number one, a lot of people are like, hey, go get an LLC. You've got this property that you own. It's in this different entity, and there's a lot to be said for that. Let me just say a lot of people don't manage their entity correct enough, and Bob will say amen, correct enough to where they're fully protected. Most people are not doing the proper paperwork. Most people are not handling the money correct enough that you can have an LLC, but it's not, you know. Here's the thing is,
Never filed.
right, yeah. So there's a lot of things there. They're like, just because you think you have an LLC, all these things. Here's one of the biggest things is hiring a third party company. What it does is it takes the management liability off you from some things. Now, should everyone hire? That's a different story, but it's one of those things where when I came onto a condo complex, they had a managed, like a property manager, someone who was like on staff, and she was running amok, like she had no guidance. She was doing whatever she wanted. The things she was saying to people, all these things, and I was like, that is such a liability. It was not worth it. So one of the first things we did is that we terminated her. I want to say it nicely, and then eventually went to third-party management. One of the biggest things was to move the liability off of us, right? Her actions, but here's the thing: is also some people just, you know, self-awareness is very potent. They either know that they don't have the backbone to tell a tenant, Christmas comes every single year, don't use that as an excuse for the 3rd year in a row, like it's always on the calendar. They don't have the bleeding, they have too much of the bleeding heart, right? Or they can't tell a tenant that, hey, if you're late, this is now going through the eviction process if you're late. They don't have the backbone to do that. Some people just know. The other thing is they just know some landlords have too loose of a tongue, right? You need to not, for the sake of liability, because it's not a matter of if, it's a when. So let's take the next final 15 minutes. One is, are there any top tips that you want to like really express? If someone is managing for themselves, you know, anything along those lines that you just want to say, hey, management 101, what are some of the most critical parts?
I'd say getting an application and actually processing it. A lot of people get away from validating any information. So processing your application. If they've got a pet, look into petscreening.com. getting a good lease.
Do you use the state one or do you have your own?
We've created our own now. I had my attorney draft it.
Yeah, can you please give us, like an example, one of the common terms or the most common terms in the lease agreement?
In the lease agreement, cool.
Yeah.
Mine's like
I mean,
18
the main
pages
things.
long.
Hold on, did you just hear what he said?
What is that?
It's 18 pages long.
18 pages?
The
Oh, wow.
lease has been created and rewritten. I mean, we make adjustments probably annually now.
Yeah, it needs to be that live
And
document,
it's
yeah.
basically, whatever my attorney hears or whatever we hear from the previous year, we're adjusting for the next year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why leases have gotten so long, because, every page and every addendum and every change in size
situations
is because of a
today.
lawsuit or something that was complained about or issued in the past. I mean, we've had cases, not to get off subject, but we've had issues, not issues, but cases where, you're sitting in front of a judge and we're using somebody else's because we haven't put them on our lease yet because the property was just acquired and we absorbed that tenant, and it's the state lease and it's 4 pages long with no addendum, and the judge says, well, you can't put somebody out for this because it doesn't say that in here. Well, no, it says right here, no additions, no changes without written authorization. Can they show me the written authorization? No, but it didn't say that they couldn't do that.
Oh my God.
That's the state, and that's the state one. I mean,
And that's the state document,
Yeah.
and because the judge knows our lease, he's expecting to see all the additions. And he knows it's in there.
you're talking like a
It's
pet
spelled out.
addendum, or you're talking like okay.
For this one, it was a pool specifically. So we got rejected because it didn't specify pool, even though a pool is an addition that needs written authorization. He didn't say it that way. Okay, it is what it is. I mean, at the end of the day, we do start trying to convert tenants when they're absorbed to a new lease. That way, they're on our paperwork. Not everybody will do that. They want to stay through the term. So it's hard to pinpoint or say one thing when it's 18 pages or more. But
Just one particular thing. Do you have a term saying that you cannot throw paper towels in the toilet?
no, but in our rules and regs, it talks about using proper, I forget the word, but it's like proper toilet paper. And we will have a discussion with them typically at the property saying, this is a 75-year-old house. And, so you just be wary of that. It's kind of like when you're in the outskirts or on a septic, you want to use papers and stuff that's meant for a septic, not for a city municipal.
Well, how many people are using those wipes these days that are so
Everybody
bad?
thinks It says disposable.
Oh, yeah, flushable.
100 years. I mean, you can see the videos online of, plumbers cleaning out lines and septic.
Yeah.
Where they're using nothing but disposable towelettes, and there's a cake of them, and it's
Yeah.
pounds and pounds of it. So, I mean, there's really nothing that's going to be that considered disposable. Leasing, the
proper
processing,
paperwork, going through the application.
Marketing is another big thing we didn't really touch upon, but I mean, Facebook at times, you just gotta kind of monitor it, there's scammers out there,
How do you
so
protect
gotta-
against
you
the
gotta watch
scammers?
yourself.
Yeah, so a really common scam is people will use your pictures
Yep,
and then they will start marketing and tell people to, hey, transfer me
send me
on
$500 deposit, and
for
I'll let you rent
PayPal.
for $800, even though it's a $1,300 rental. Quick story, I mean, we had somebody move in, got scammed, went in, they were told, just break the lock off because I can't find my key.
Like nothing that like triggers.
Nothing that makes it, yeah.
So-
One guy told us about it. We go over there on a Sunday, change the locks. There's a couple of small things inside. We throw it out. We get a call from the neighbor because I gave him a card out to him and said, if you see lights on, all the lights are off. If you see lights on, call me. 10:30 at night, guy calls and says, hey, a bunch of lights just came on. Okay, on our way. Grab our tools, as we call it now. Run out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we get out there, well, there's nobody there, thankfully, but a whole house of furniture has been moved in about a 2-hour, 3-hour span.
So one tip, look, make friends with the neighbors.
Absolutely.
Make friends with neighbors are the best snitches.
Or you kidding?
they might also know somebody who wants to move in. Now, whether they qualify is a different story, but, you know, if their friend wants to move to the neighborhood.
Well, sometimes the parents might have like their grown children who wants to move in down the street from grandparents because they're raising a family and they want to be close to parents for, you know.
And those tenants will stay when they're living next door to somebody that they want to be friends with or stay with. So,
And their family won't let them go bad on it.
exactly.
Right, because there's so much value there in that. So, guys, one of those big things that you want to take a look at here is when it comes down to management, like keep in mind the tenant is a huge part of it being an asset or a liability. So when he's talking about all these things with screening, whatnot, you do want to go through that. Are there any common mistakes that you think that landlords make?
Deferred maintenance, not going by their property.
Yeah.
Being, like you said earlier, you know, not wanting to go to the tenant and say, hey, you haven't paid, you need to pay, and or I'm going to have to put you out. More befriending the tenant.
Like letting that process go too long.
Absolutely. I mean, I was going to say, I mean, the two big things, deferred maintenance that we pick up when owners just are tired of it, they don't know what else to do. It's getting out of control. And the other is, the guy owes me 4 months of rent. I don't know what to do. Well, 3.5 months ago, you should be getting a notice. I mean, you know,
1 day late, you already got your notice.
that's
Yeah.
it. So at that, you know, those are the reasons, you know, landlords are either selling or they're looking for us as managers.
Again, those mom and pop landlords, right? So one of the things, guys, I want you to take away, he has repeatable processes. Have you heard that he talks about these processes he has? Again, what does that mean? Like treating it like a business. Think about this restaurant being run like a business. Every day they come in and the kitchen staff has a list of things, a checklist of things to do, right? He was talking about the paperwork, right? With his move-in, a tenant moves in, they go through the inspection, right? So there's things that need to happen. You need to have a repeatable process. One of the most critical parts is when you have a repeatable process, number one, everyone gets treated the same. So that actually helps because you're not discriminating. And because, you know, but here's the thing is having that repeatable process is so critical because otherwise, number one, what if you forget something? Like a critical part, if you don't go and do like a move-in inspection, and truly it had a default, and it wasn't the tenant's fault. And when they move out, they're like, hey, no, that was there. And if they have the documentation to show it, and you're like, no, I'm standing on my word. That's not, I mean, like if you don't have the process, a lot of times you can't stand on your own 2 feet. But then you see that a lot too. Hey, what is your eviction process? They're late on the 6th. That's when the process, you know, he's talking about the process gets rolling, right? Like he's talking about the different processes, the process for marketing, right? So one of the big things is if you're doing it on Facebook Marketplace, but if you're sharing it into some groups, you want to know what one of our process is? To turn off the comments when you share it into a group. Every single time, because you know what? I want people to see it, but I don't want to hear everyone's opinion on it, because guess what? They're all going to give it.
They can affect other people's opinions.
Everyone, and you know what? For someone that is going to be a fantastic opportunity for them, but then they might be dissuaded because they read so-and-so's comment, right? So there's certain things, there's certain things like that. Just having your process for marketing, your process for your application process, your process for screening tenants, your process for moving them in, your process for collecting rent, your process for evicting, your process for lease renewals, and then your process for a move out. Is there anything else? Practice for maintenance. Yeah. So he was talking about, he uses a system where they can actually log in and do a maintenance request, right? Like those things are critical. If whatever your goals are. So I'm in the place where at this point, my portfolio, I'm putting it all to management. Like in the beginning, I self-managed, but at this point, it's all going, because at a certain point, my skills are better used in buying properties and finding deals, right? So that's one of those things where it's like real estate investing is a team sport. Some people have the self-awareness up front to say, hey, I'm not cut out for this. Some people say, I don't want to be cut out for this. But some people, they wait until they find out too late. So any questions for Steve? Go ahead, Lauren.
The question is, like, let's say one of the tenants called about an issue in the house. It could be an AC, it could be plumbing or whatever. So in case you don't have a vendor available to go do the job, what is your best solution in that case? Like, how much time do you have?
I mean, it depends on the situation. I mean, we've had cases where AC goes out. our vendor goes out, maybe not same day, the next day. I mean, to me, that's pretty
So
responsible.
what's a reasonable time? Like,
Again,
there's no
it's a
budget.
case by case, it depends on, what the case, I mean, say this for instance, I mean, air conditioned, it's 60 degrees outside, but they want it to be 55. To me, that's not an emergency.
Yeah.
And so if my vendor says he can't be there in a day or two, okay. he'll
They
be-
can make it a big issue as a tenant.
I
They
mean-
can make it.
Well, it depends. Well, one of the big things is, so some of them, they're, at the end of the day, so if they make it a big issue, what is their ultimate enforcement of that issue? Legal, right? If they're going to stand in front of a judge and say, it was, and you could show
Right.
the weather records that it was
verifiable.
60 degrees that day. And the thing here is, some people are going to make a stink no matter what you do.
Right.
You have to say, hey, what is a true emergency?
And that's what we try to figure out. I mean, again, it's, if you were to say it's a plumbing issue and it's clogged up and it's a one bath house, yeah, we need to get somebody there now, not tomorrow or the next day. So it's a case by
Yeah.
case, but our maintenance office or department knows, these are our criteria. If you have anything outside of this, let us know. We'll make that final decision because we're the ones who are going to be dealing with it. But typically, you're going to have one of our vendors will be there within a day or so. Okay, unless it needs to be done that day.
And some things it's like, again, you've got to be the one, you've got to be able to take how they're acting and understand how to lead that moment, right? And manage the situation. You see what you're saying, like, hey, what's acceptable as emergency, what is not? So we recently had an older tenant who had gone out of town, and they came back to town to find that their yard was completely flooded to the point that it was like 8 houses down. So it had been flooding for a while. What it was is a root had busted the galvanized piping that was coming from the city line meter at the road all the way to the house. So a root had been pushing against it for so long and it finally broke. So we could not find it. We realized it wasn't the house, thank God. It wasn't coming from underneath the house, thank God. But now we're like, well, where the hell is it in the ground? And you could just see the moving water, and you could just see the meter doing this. I called 15 different plumbers. My main plumber was like my go-to guy, Gaspar here in Slidell. Fantastic guy. I've been using Gaspar for years. He said, Courtney, I am so sorry. I am so bogged down. I can't even give you a courtesy of coming out. But he said at 6 a.m. he jumped on the phone with me, and he said, I'll tell you what to go do. And he gave me some tips. It still was about 3 days before we can get someone out there to come and repair it. So what did I do? I talked to the tenant. They understood. Contractors are so difficult to get out right now, right? Mm-hmm. So she understood. But what did I do? She didn't have any running water. So to stop the meter from running, we went and turned it off, right? We contacted the city of Covington, the utility company. We turned it off. But then one of the things we did was I brought her a few cases of water, right? And then she was like, hey, I think I'm going to go stay. It ended up being, I think, 2 days. So I think we did that on a Sunday, and by a Tuesday it was fixed or something like that. And so, look, there's a level here that a lease is two-sided. They have to show up and report these repairs and, pay their rent and be a good tenant, be a good neighbor, comply with the agreement of the lease. But your other part, he was talking about quiet enjoyment, right? Don't go bombard them all the time. But at the same time, you've got to provide good housing, right? And so there's going to be some situations that are, kind of out of everyone's control. And a lot of times if a tenant, she saw that we were doing everything that we could to fix it. And so she was reasonable with it, right? And so that's a huge part to it is also in picking a good tenant. If I have a tenant who has a horrible attitude, I don't care if they're good paying. I don't that is someone who's not the best fit for me. That money isn't as green as I want it to be. Let's just say that, right? But that's a huge part because I have some people, it doesn't matter what I do, it's never good enough, right? So you have to kind of be careful with that.
And that's cases that everybody has.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, they're like you could redo the entire unit today. They're going to find the fault with it, and immediately turn in a work order saying this is wrong. I mean, I was going to jump on about the instead of plumbing, air conditioning's another big one.
Yeah.
As it gets hotter in the summer, I mean, we've got a contingency that just recently we were working on where the AC guy goes out. He's got to get an outside compressor, I think it was, and it's one of my properties. And so we're going to run over it, and we delivered a couple of window units.
Yep.
This will get you until the part comes in.
Yeah.
it's supposed to be in next
Yep.
week. I mean, there's
Or
nothing
space
we can do.
heaters in the winter.
Correct.
I had that just happen where we
Correct.
they called and complained about it for a few days. I authorized the property management company to go get some space heaters and pry them. They never returned the phone call to let them bring it in. And so then we're like, and then so the property manager said, we just went and returned it because after 3 weeks of getting in touch with them, I mean, the event was over. You know?
Right.
And
so
so,
those are things that, I mean, we've got a warehouse, so we've got some of those things sitting in the warehouse,
Yep.
so when it happens, we can do that. Now, 10 properties have the same situation, we'd have to go out and buy some more stuff. But I mean, at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do. You know, as a landlord, as a management company, and we do our best. And sometimes, yes, sometimes there's nothing you can do. And again, like in the air conditioning situation, he's ordered it because it's under warranty. It's a brand new system. It's maybe 2 years old or whatever. But the part's not there, whatever it is he needs. And so they said, we're shipping it in. It'll be here Tuesday. So again, our resolution to that was bring him a couple window units. At least we can cool the unit down for him. And as soon as the part's in, he'll go install it.
so it doesn't hurt to have, like, for example, like he talks about it, like, so I have kept some supplies.
Right.
So for example, those window units, they go fix AC, bring those back, keep those in storage so that if a next situation happens, you're not having to go buy, if it's temporary use. So some of those things, worth having. Any other burning questions for him that you guys have some general questions about in regards to this? Anyone else? Okay. So let me talk about something real quick. So Steve, I know when I got meeting with you, look, not all property managers are created equal. The reality is, number one, you're going to have to find a property manager that, whether if you're managing yourself, you've got to consistently be improving your skill set, but you've got to find one that's a good fit for you. But another thing too is you're not going to see 100% eye to eye. He talked today about some opinions, right? That he has and how he has his management style. So you're never going to see 100% eye to eye with the manager. You have to find someone that you see enough eye to eye with that's a good fit for you. Some of you guys, based on your goals, for example, some of you guys are in real estate for lifestyle. So one of the number one things I'm going to say is, no matter what, whenever you're underwriting a deal, always build in a 10% management fee. If you're managing, pay yourself. Add that as additional profit. But have that so that if you ever need to or want to, you can outsource it, right? So many people don't do that. What it does is it pits their back against the wall. So Steve, do you want to do the honors?
Oh, no, you're good at that.
If you guys have come to meetings here, literally always trying to delegate giving away books. So
You do
first,
such a good job.
oh, thank you. So Steve, thank you so much for sharing. Steve is at most of our meetups. So I got to meet Steve a while back, and we started hanging out. Their office is based out of Tarrytown, Gretna. By the way, how he handled the Araby tornado, I mean, I was talking with him that night that it happened. They were immediately getting in touch with tenants, checking in on them. Because being out of the West Wing, right, you guys remember that massive tornado came through. He's checking in with them, saying, hey, how's everyone doing? How you okay? Been doing assessments on the properties. I mean, I know we've been having some scary, 5-6 weeks of, that weather. And so that's something that's huge. Look, here's another big thing. When you're looking at property managers, because we talk about it ourselves for self-managing, there's a difference between if you're managing 3 properties and if you're managing 30, right? There's a whole different system for that. But here's the thing is, when you're interviewing property managers, you may want the guy who only is managing 5 on the side. Or you may want the company that's managing 500. You see what I'm saying? So those are going to be 2 different things you want to ask when you're interviewing a property manager is, what does your team look like? Right? He was talking about his different departments. He has his leasing department, his management department, different things. Do you have any other department? Maintenance, and accounting, right? So you want to ask him, do you have multiple departments? Here's one of my biggest red flags with property management companies is when the owner of the management company, it's someone who's scaling. So a management company is scaling. One of my biggest red flags is when that manager is running around as an operator for every department. So for example, we hired one for a large complex, and we kept asking for something to get fit. Oh, the exterior lights for this big complex.
were constantly, like, they had a whole bunch of them out. And they're like, oh yeah, it's on our list. Well, like, a year later, they got around to it, and who did I see up there on the ladder changing it? The owner of the company. And I said, this is why things are not getting done, because that person is not willing to give up control and is not good at outsourcing and managing. So that's always a really big thing I'm looking at. Look, if you're managing hundreds of properties, you can't be the person doing that. You can't be swinging it. So when you're doing interviews, you want to find out, okay, who's on their team, what departments do they have? Because, for example, if that person has to go to eviction court, are they also the person responsible for payouts and, you know, getting you your money every month, right? All those things. And that's why it's very different if it's a small, like an individual agent who's maybe doing 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 on the side. Over, you know, you got to look at those things. Maybe it's a good fit for you to have an agent who just does a few on the side versus a full-blown management company, right? And look, here's the other thing: commercial and residential. If you're looking at those two things, those are 2 different interviews I would have if I had a commercial property versus a residential property, because those are 2 different skill sets. You know, so those are all things you want to look, and you want to find a manager who is familiar with the area. Because at the same time, also the state, right? So for example, you started buying in Mississippi last year on the coast, but what you've done is you started building your team out there so that you can get to know, you know, the area better, right? The person who's a yes person who does everything is not the person you want, right? Okay, so that with that saying, who here remembers? This is what's so hard to get away, folks. Who here remembers what his income requirement is for tenants? Cole.
2.5.
2.5. You've read Rich Dad.
Yeah.
If you guys haven't read Rich Dad, who here in the room has not read Rich Dad Poor Dad before? Okay, I'll give it to you here. So Rich Dad Poor Dad is a bit of a mecca for investors.
Oh wait, I can't take this. I'm on a motorcycle. You have to do it away.
You can. You see, that is the first time I've had that experience. Good one. Cool, you guys. Look, thank you guys so much for coming. Hey, speaking of that Rich Dad Poor Dad, Cole's on my team. Once a month, we do the Hammond meeting together. It's either 1 month, it's the round table like we had last week, but this month will be the cash flow game. So that's based on Rich Dad. Fun fact, Rich Dad Poor Dad was written as a pamphlet for the game. The game came first, but most people know the book. So with that being said, you guys, see you guys May 10th in Covington. Thank you for coming out. Make sure you square up. And look, Stephen's cards over here. Our other 2 main sponsors is Florida Lee Law Untitled. So we got Pelican Realty here, so if you have any questions you want to ask them. But the other one is Bob Norton. And so Bob has finally lifted his head from the depth of tax season. They're still doing it. His wife's saying, no, he hasn't.
See you.
So we have, guys, a lot of, so Steve and Nick are at almost every meeting. So Bob, and now Penny is often, and Madeline as well, are at almost every meeting. Look, they love talking about their specialties. So if you have any questions with that, definitely reach out. My card's up here too if we haven't already connected. Thank you guys so much for coming. Have a great week. And see you guys. Have a good one. Thanks. Thank you, Steve.